We're here today to talk about second chance hiring or fair chance hiring. I'll use the two interchangeably. It's the intentional seeking out of people with criminal records as a talent pool for your employment. Before we get into that, though, I have a question for all of you. Do you have heroes? I'm 62 years old. I'm not ashamed to say I still have heroes. Let me introduce you to some of them. Upper left is Sarah Knoster. She's the founder of Mixed Staffing and Recruiting in Western Michigan. With $100 in her pocket out of college 12 years ago, she now serves the talent needs of thousands of employers in Western Michigan. Mark Peters is second generation CEO of Butterball Farms, a company founded by his father. Butterball Farms in Grand Rapids. His father was the creator of the Butterball turkey. They sold those patents today. They're a commercial butter manufacturer. And then the gentleman on the lower photograph with one of his associates is Marcus Sheenshank, also a second generation owner and CEO of JBM Packaging in Lebanon, Ohio. They're an envelope maker. So a founder and two second generation CEOs. Kind of familiar structure to folks in this room. So why are they my heroes? Well, they're doing something a little bit different. You see, Sarah has placed, in the 12 years she's been in business, over 4,000 people in the industrial economy of Western Michigan, 65% of whom have felony convictions. Mark Peters currently employs 152 individuals, 49 of whom have criminal convictions. Mark also banded together with many of the business leaders of Western Michigan and created it's called The Source. It's essentially a private social service network to support employees who would otherwise be marginalized from the workforce. There are 26 companies that are members of The Source. They're assessed the costs of running this network, but it's an investment, and they measure their investment largely in savings by lowering their turnover rate. Each year they're assessed. The current return on that investment is 330% in cost savings. And then finally, Marcus Sheenshank is the subject of chapter 6 of the book. I'm the only author who's going to tell you, don't read my book, because it's a lot to ask someone to read a 284 book. We all have books we've been given at conferences that sit on a shelf. Don't sit on the shelf. Don't be intimidated by that. Turn to chapter 6, page 145. That 24-page chapter will tell you all you need to know, because it's the story of Marcus and his company's journey from 0 employees with criminal records to currently 40 of their 142 employees have criminal records. Moreover, it's been so successful, he set up a paid training program in an Ohio State prison, so he has highly trained employees coming out in a steady pipeline of talent. Not in the book, it's happened since. He's been so successful in meeting his talent needs at a time when his competitors were talent constrained that he's won so much business, he's had to expand. And instead of choosing to expand their business in his semi-rural county seat, he chose to put the new facility in inner city Cincinnati, a tough inner city, because he knows where to find untapped talent among that group. And I should probably, in a future presentation, include a picture of fellow Tugboat member Cody Nath, because when I visited one of his facilities in Houston, 40 of the 45 non-managerial employees were second chance hires. And Cody has seen how this has worked so well for him, but moreover, he's seen what it can do for other businesses and create greater prosperity in the Houston market that he's trying to promote it across the Houston business community. All of these heroes of mine chose to do this not for charitable reasons, but to address an urgent business challenge. And you've heard about that challenge yesterday. There were a couple mentions, and that's our structural labor shortage. Let me give you my take on the labor shortage and why it's so important. In fact, I believe that this is the central business challenge for the next decade for all business leaders. It's such a big challenge because it is so structural in nature, and the fundamental problem that we stopped having enough births is something that's really hard to address. The chart you see before you is the fertility rate of in the US. Fertility is the number of children that women will have on average over their lifetime. The left-hand side of this chart, 1960, tail end of the baby boom generation, we had on average 3.6 children for every woman. That created a robust flow of workforce that drove some of those great GDP growth rates in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s that we remember. The US economy used to grow at 3.5%, 4% on a regular basis. Today, the Congressional Budget Office projects that the long-term growth rate of the US economy, largely because of workforce challenges, is constrained to less than 2%. If you look today, the right-hand side of that chart, what's happened to fertility? It's fallen sharply. In fact, at about 1.6 fertility rate, 1.6 children on average per woman, we are at historic lows in the US. And we have fallen well below that horizontal line you see there. That's the fertility, that's the replacement rate. That's the fertility rate you need just to replace your population, excluding immigration. But at this low level, immigration isn't even enough to supplement it. Ultimately, we're going to start following other countries and seeing a shrinking population. Huge challenge for the workforce. But that was a gradual challenge. That should have been a gradual challenge. What happened for this to be felt so painfully, so quickly? Well, COVID accelerated this. In addition to the 10,000 workers a day we expected to retire over the next decade, COVID in the first 18 months, according to a St. Louis Federal Reserve study, 2.4 million older workers retired earlier than expected. A gradual problem became a sudden problem. And I'm here to tell you it's going to get worse. If you think about someone who retires, a baby boomer who steps out of the workforce, they don't stop being consumers. There's just a smaller percentage of potential employees to serve this large and still growing consumer base. The chart you see before you is projections from the Census Bureau. What percentage of our population is of working age, economists defined as 18 to 65-year-olds, is working age, is able to serve, to be there, to be employees, to serve the total population of consumers? As you can see, this number is going to keep falling. The labor shortage may have eased from the worst of the COVID pain, but it's going to continue and actually going to start getting worse again, and will continue to get worse for the next 10 years. You see, a drop of 61% to 59% may not seem that big, but each percentage point is a percent of the total population. So each percentage point today is 3.3 million. So there's no single solution, but the best solutions lie in making sure that we're taking this population of available workers and making sure they're actually in the workforce, those who want to be, and not only landing a job, but able to contribute to the greatest degree of their capability. So on one of the buses, the shuttles, yesterday, and one of our colleagues here mentioned, no worker left behind. So who are we leaving behind? Well, there's lots of people we leave behind, but the single biggest pool of people we overlook or we hold back from advancement if we do give them an entry-level job are people with criminal records, and there are an awful lot of them. You often hear the right-hand bar, the number 70 million thrown out. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. It's taken from state databases that include arrests but not convictions, tax liens. Some of the state databases that contribute to this number might even be traffic stops. But the hardest barriers are those felt by people with felony convictions. There are 19 million, that's the bar highlighted here, 19 million of our fellow Americans have felony convictions. When we hear the word felony, or think of felon, our minds tend to go to the worst possible crimes. Here's the reality, and I hope this makes you rethink some of your own assumptions. Of those 19 million, fewer than half were convicted of a crime of such threat to public safety that they even had to serve a prison term. A felony may not be what you think it is. Here's what we know and how we know this group is overlooked, or particularly those who come out of incarceration where we have some better data. Studies have shown that in the first year out of incarceration, the unemployment rates are north of 50%. Long-term unemployment rates for people who've been incarcerated, last updated study was 27%. It's almost certainly lower today, but it's certainly a multiple of the national unemployment rate. We simply overlook this talent pool. This is not to say that every single person is hireable or can be a good employee. But when you start with a pool of 19 million, it's easy to say there are millions. And while we can talk about averages of educational attainment and work experience, we don't hire averages. We hire people. And within this 19 million are people of every background, every education level, every industry experience level. And yet we overlook them at a time when no worker should be left behind. If you're going to go looking for talent here, you have to accept that you must do this with intention. And there's a whole list of things that you're going to have to address. Regulatory barriers that exist, regulatory barriers for people with criminal records, particularly felony convictions, happen at the federal level, the state level, the local level. All told, those are called collateral consequences, the punishments that keep on punishing even after people have done their time. There are some 44,000 restrictions for people. No wonder they don't get employed. There are workarounds, there are ways to get these restrictions removed as an employer or as a candidate, but you have to know that they're out there. You have to face the objections. There are three main objections in my experience. The first is safety. Is something bad going to happen on at your workplace or to a customer because you've hired someone? And what's your financial liability, negligent hiring liability? You're not hiring everyone. You're selecting in a way and with a process that protects you and ensures that you minimize and manage these risks effectively. Performance, there are people who believe that people with criminal records are lousy employees. If you selected them randomly, they might be. My friend Rob Perez in Lexington, Kentucky, owns a couple of bakery cafes, Deviate Kitchens. When he first opened up, virtually all of his employees are still people in early stages of recovery from opioid addiction. Most of them have criminal records. People wouldn't come to his cafes. I said, Rob, were they afraid? He said, no. They thought the quality would be terrible. So only after hundreds of five-star reviews and being named on Yelp's top 100 bakery cafes in the country that people realized second chance doesn't mean second rate. And then some people fear for the reputation of the business. You don't have to let people know, but you might want to. This is an old-fashioned kind of concern. We know from any number of surveys, consumers want to do business with companies that produce some social good. We know millennial and particularly Gen Z employees want to be involved in companies that do some social good. You have to address the perceived career risk of the people who might be making these decisions. Your HR person, if you're large enough to have an HR team, knows there's asymmetric risk here. If I say yes to someone with a criminal record and they're a good employee, that's your job, hiring good employees. If I say yes and something goes wrong, who hired the felon? So you have to make sure that your HR professionals have the protection and the guidance or a structure that supports their being able to not take on undue risk, but make appropriate decisions in terms of hiring. And that may require some structural process changes, taking a committee approach to reviewing criminal records or kicking final decisions upstairs to executive leadership, all sorts of ways to do this. Some of them I document, of course, in the book. Ultimately, it requires you as executive leaders to take a stand and say, we're going to do this. What does this mean? Well, there's a range of opportunities here. And like anything else, the more you invest, the more you get out of it. The starting point is just removing undue barriers. Don't automatically, either de facto or formally, don't automatically exclude people with criminal records. Give them real consideration. You'll get a return on that investment. You might consider pilot programs. If you're large enough to have multiple facilities, designate one facility or one job code as an area where you'd like to try this out. Or the biggest investment and the biggest return is make this a key part of your talent strategy. All of them work. The more you put in, the more you get out. What it ultimately means to embrace, to make this work, is to embrace a talent model that I call the true second chance model. In one sense, it's just a very traditional model. Find the people who are a good fit for your business, give them the tools they need to thrive. But this is a model applied to a non-traditional population that has typically lived in dire poverty, limited vision for themselves, no coaching, no mentoring, and in many cases, no history of work in the family or significant history of work in the family. So you have to meet people where they are. How do you hire? How do you know who's a good hire, a person of good character, if all you know about them is they have a criminal record? Well, the core of this model is relying on nonprofits that get to know the individual and can make a holistic assessment. They are your talent scouts, if you will. And you might rely on these or other nonprofits to provide supports, because typically this talent pool doesn't need the training in the latest software. They need things like access to housing, transportation, a cell phone. You don't have to provide these as an employer, but you have to help this population navigate to the resources that are out in the community, and they are out, government and nonprofit communities. It's the only kind of support pool and support strategy that has a lot of partners who will help you finance this. So ultimately, it means embracing individuals as human beings and meeting them where they are. Why would you go to all this trouble, though? You go to all this trouble because when you find someone who's ready to turn their life around, they are eager to prove they are more than their worst mistake in life. And when you take someone who perhaps just lived life unconsciously, but as part of this rehabilitation has to examine their life and say they consciously choose to lead a different kind of life, they're actually great employees. They pay back this investment with high engagement, dedication, and loyalty to their employer, and high engagement with the job. So you have someone who is highly dedicated to their work and sticks with you. That's a recipe for productivity and a recipe for productivity, and profitability. But ultimately, this means treating people as people. So let's get rid of words like felon. Can you imagine making a mistake 30 years ago, getting a felony commitment, not even having to do prison time, and you're still a felon, no matter how you've rebuilt your life in the decades since? So it's not your next hire could be a felon. It's your next hire should be a person seeking a second chance. Here's your call to action. Recognize they're low-risk hires, people who've already rebuilt their life. They're just another employee. Go visit Second Chance Pioneers, businesses that are doing it, visit the nonprofits that can help you, and lead. That means setting a goal, making it a priority, and holding your team accountable to make it happen. I left off one hero in my life, and this is the first and greatest hero in my life. It's actually my dad. He died in 2003. My dad was the son of penniless immigrants and was raised in a ghetto. His father was not a good guy. So he had very little family support. Age 17, he enlisted in World War II, got the GI Bill when he got out. He wanted to be a lawyer. That's a 7-year program. GI Bill just covers 4 years. So he found a 7-year program at the same college and double enrolled without telling anyone. So he got his bachelor's degree and his JD from Harvard in 4 years, Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude. And then while working a graveyard shift at a factory in Hartford, Connecticut, he got his LLM from Yale. But he never lost touch with his roots. And he would go on errands on a regular basis, visiting his old neighborhood and the people he knew. As a kid, 8 or 10 years old, I'd go with him. One day we went to the old neighborhood. He introduced me to a friend of his, had a long conversation. He owned a junk shop. As we walked away, he mentioned casually to me, you know, my friend went to prison. I said, for what? He said, for murder, a crime of passion. But then my dad said something to me that has stuck with me half a century later. He said, he's done his time. Tens of millions of our fellow Americans have made mistakes, some of them grievous mistakes, but they've done their time. To live a good life, to rehabilitate themselves, be contributing members of our society. They need us, employers. But the point of this presentation is we employers need them too. Thank you.
Thank you.